Sometimes, the people who are supposed to stand by you are the first to walk away. For Victor Crane, losing his wife wasn't just a tragedy. It was the beginning of losing everything else. His in-laws blamed him for her death. They took his home. They turned their backs on him and his daughter in their darkest hour. With nowhere left to go, Victor remembered his grandfather's house, a place abandoned for 30 years, crumbling, barely standing. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. As father and daughter began to clear the ruined rooms, Victor found a locked door hidden beneath the cellar floor. Behind it lay a secret his grandfather had kept his entire life, a discovery worth $500 million. But would finding it bring them peace or just more trouble? The house looked worse than Victor remembered. Much worse. He stood in the overgrown driveway, one hand shielding his eyes from the late afternoon sun, the other gripping the handle of a battered suitcase that held nearly everything he now owned. Beside him, his daughter, Petra, shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her own bag slung over a shoulder, her face set in the carefully neutral mask she had perfected over the last 6 months. "Well," she said finally, "it's standing. That's something." Victor managed a weak smile. The house looked like an old man, too tired to care any longer. The roof sagged in the middle, shingles missing in patches that exposed the dark, weathered wood beneath. The windows were either shattered or gone completely, boarded over haphazardly with warped plywood that had grayed with age. Ivy climbed the walls in thick, woody ropes, swallowing entire sections of the facade and crawling into cracks in the foundation. The porch steps were rotted through in places, and the front door hung slightly askew on its rusted hinges. No one had lived here in 30 years. Not since his grandfather, Augustus, had passed away, leaving the property in a legal limbo Victor's own father had never bothered to resolve. Now, through a quirk of bureaucratic luck and a lawyer who had finally tracked him down, it was his, just in time for him to have nothing else left. "Dad?" Petra's voice brought him back. "You okay?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. The last 3 months had been a whirlwind of loss and humiliation he still couldn't fully process. First, Diane, his wife of 23 years, gone in a matter of weeks from an illness diagnosed far too late. Then came the crushing, immediate medical bills. Then the house. Their house. The one where they'd raised Petra, taken by the bank. And finally, the Hargroves. Randolph and Constance Hargrove, Diane's parents, had made their position clear at the funeral. It was his fault. If he'd pushed for doctors sooner, if he'd insisted on more tests, if he'd been a better, more attentive, more demanding husband, their daughter would still be alive. Victor had tried to grieve with them, tried to explain that Diane herself had dismissed her symptoms, that she was the one who'd waited, who'd insisted she was fine. But the Hargroves didn't want explanations. They wanted someone to blame, and he was convenient. When the bank foreclosed, Victor had asked if he and Petra could stay with them, just temporarily, just until he could find work and get back on his feet. Randolph had looked at him with cold, flat eyes and said no. He said he would not help the man who killed his daughter through neglect. He said Petra was welcome, but Victor was not. Petra chose her father without a moment's hesitation. The decision cost her a relationship with her grandparents, but she never wavered. At 24, working remotely as a graphic designer, she packed her laptop and her clothes and stood by his side as the sheriff's deputies supervised the eviction. They'd spent 2 weeks in a motel, bleeding through what little savings were left, before the lawyer's letter about the house arrived. Come on, Victor said now, forcing motion into his limbs. Let's see what we're working with. The front door took a considerable shove to open, scraping over the warped floorboards with a shriek that sent birds scattering from the eaves. Inside, the smell hit them at once. Decades of dust, mildew, rotting wood, and something else. The scent of abandonment itself. The smell of loneliness and time. Petra took out her phone and switched on its flashlight. The power had been cut years ago. Thin shafts of sunlight pierced the boarded-up windows, creating strange patterns in the time-frozen living room. Furniture was draped in stained sheets, their shapes ghostly and indistinct. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips, exposing water-damaged plaster beneath. The ceiling showed signs of leaks, with brown stains spreading like continents on a faded map. At least the floor seems solid, Petra said, testing her weight on the boards. Victor stepped further inside, memories surfacing unbidden. He'd been here as a boy, visiting his grandfather Augustus during summer holidays. He remembered a tall, quiet man with careful hands and patient eyes. Augustus had worked as, what was it? An art restorer, Victor thought, or maybe an appraiser. He traveled often for work, always returning with stories of old estates and forgotten collections. The kitchen was a disaster. Cabinet doors hung open, revealing rusted tins and rodent droppings. The sink had pulled away from the wall, and the linoleum floor was buckled and cracked. But the bones were good. The house had been well built, from an era when craftsmanship mattered. "We can make this work," Victor said, more to convince himself than her. Petra joined him, her designer's eye assessing the damage. "It'll take time, and money we don't have. I can do most of the work myself. I still have tools in the truck." She touched his arm gently. "Dad, you're a software engineer. When's the last time you replaced a window?" 20 years ago doesn't mean I forgot how." He tried to smile. "Besides, I have time now. Lots of time." The bitterness in his voice made her flinch, and he regretted it instantly. She'd lost her mother, too. Lost her home, her stability, her grandparents, and she had stuck with him through it all. "I'm sorry," he said. "That wasn't fair." Petra squeezed his arm. "We'll be okay, Dad. We'll fix this place up. You'll find a job. Things will get better." He wanted so desperately to believe her. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring, taking an inventory of what needed immediate attention. The list grew with alarming speed. Roof repair, window replacement, electrical work, plumbing, insulation. The basement looked like it had flooded at some point, leaving everything down there ruined and moldy. As night fell, they made camp in the living room. Petra had brought battery-powered lanterns, and they rolled out sleeping bags on the floor after sweeping away the worst of the debris. They ate sandwiches from a gas station, neither of them very hungry. "Tell me about him," Petra said after a long silence. "Grandpa Augustus. I don't really remember him." Victor leaned back against the wall, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling. He was quiet, thoughtful. He traveled a lot for his work, restoring old paintings, authenticating pieces for collectors and museums. He knew art better than anyone I've ever met. Did he talk about his work? Sometimes. He'd tell me about discovering a hidden signature under centuries of varnish, or identifying a masterpiece that had been misattributed for generations. He loved the detective work of it. He said every painting had a story, and his job was to help it be told. Why did he let this place fall apart? Victor had wondered the same thing. I don't know. After my grandmother died, he traveled even more. Maybe he couldn't stand being here without her. Maybe he just got old and tired and lost the will to fight. Petra was quiet for a moment. Is that what happens? You just lose the will to fight? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Victor knew she wasn't just asking about Augustus. No, he said firmly. You choose to keep fighting, even when it's hard, even when you don't know if it's worth it. She nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. They talked for a while longer, sharing memories of Diane, crying a little, laughing occasionally at a shared moment. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. Victor lay awake long after Petra's breathing had deepened into sleep, watching the stars through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. The old house settled around him, creaking and groaning as it adjusted to having people inside it again after so many empty years. Tomorrow, they would start the repairs. Tomorrow, they would begin the slow work of rebuilding. But tonight, in the dark of his grandfather's abandoned house, Victor let himself feel the full weight of all he had lost and wondered if he would ever find his way back. 2 weeks passed in a blur of physical labor and small victories. Victor threw himself into the work with an intensity that bordered on obsession, rising before dawn and working until his hands were raw and his back screamed for rest. It was easier than thinking, easier than remembering. Petra divided her time between helping with repairs and maintaining her freelance work, setting up a makeshift office in what had once been Augustus's study. Her laptop became their financial lifeline, generating just enough income to buy materials and keep them fed. The financial pressure was a constant, crushing weight. Medical bills from Diane's treatment still arrived weekly, each one a paper and ink ghost Victor couldn't escape. He set up payment plans for what he could, ignored the rest, and tried not to think about the collection agencies that would inevitably start calling. Still, they made progress on the house. The roof was patched and no longer leaked. Most of the windows were replaced with salvaged panes Victor found at a demolition yard. The kitchen sink was functional again, even if the cabinets remained a wreck. Small steps, one day at a time. On a Thursday afternoon, Victor was in the cellar, prying up rotten floorboards to replace them. The space was dark and damp, smelling of earth and decay. He'd been putting this job off, knowing it would be the worst of it, but it could wait no longer. The board he was working on refused to budge. The nails were rusted tight into the joists below. He repositioned his pry bar, put his weight into it, and heard the wood crack. The plank gave way suddenly, and Victor stumbled backward, catching himself against the stone wall. When he looked down at where the board had been, he saw something that didn't belong. Metal. Dark iron, caked with rust and dirt, but unmistakably man-made. He knelt closer, brushing away the debris with his hand. The metal formed a square, about 3 feet on each side, set flush with the foundation. A door. No, a trapdoor. And in its center, almost invisible beneath the grime, was a combination lock. Petra! His voice echoed in the cellar. Petra, get down here. He heard her footsteps overhead, then on the stairs. What is it? Look at this. She crouched beside him, the light from her phone illuminating the discovery. Is that a safe? Set into the floor? Victor cleared away more dirt, revealing the full outline. The iron was heavy, industrial grade, the kind made to last. Why would Grandpa Augustus have this? Petra ran her fingers along the edge, finding the seam where the door met its frame. And why hide it? Why lock it? Victor studied the combination lock. It was an old-fashioned model with 4 rotating dials, each numbered 0 through 9. The metal was oxidized, but the mechanism looked intact. What had he been keeping down here? They spent the next hour clearing the remaining floorboards, exposing the entire trapdoor. It was solid, built to keep something in or someone out. Victor tried the lock, spinning the dials at random. Nothing. The mechanism was either seized or the combination was set. "We need to find the combination," Petra said. "Did Grandpa Augustus leave any papers? A safe deposit box? Anything?" Victor shook his head. "The lawyer who contacted me about the house said the estate was minimal. This property, and whatever was in it, that was it." "Then maybe," Petra said, her eyes scanning the dark corners of the cellar, "the combination is hidden somewhere in the house." They began a systematic search, starting in Augustus's study. The room had been left largely untouched, though time and weather had taken their toll. The desk drawers were stuck fast, but pried open with some effort, revealing old receipts, expired insurance policies, and photographs of people Victor didn't recognize. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of yellowed newspapers, Petra found a leather-bound journal. "Dad," she said, her voice hushed, "look at this." The journal was worn, its cover cracked and faded. Victor took it carefully, his hands suddenly gentle, and opened it to the first age-spotted page. The handwriting inside was Augustus's. Victor recognized it from the birthday cards he'd received as a child. It was neat, precise, methodical. The entries were undated, but they seemed to span years, perhaps even decades. Most were brief, cryptic notes that meant nothing to Victor. Provenance verified on the landscape. Documentation complete. Meeting with the estate lawyer. Terms acceptable. The collection grows, as does the responsibility. What collection?" Petra asked, reading over his shoulder. Victor flipped through more pages, searching for clarity. Near the middle of the journal, he found a longer entry, one that stole the breath from his lungs. "Some things are worth more than money. Some things must be protected at all costs. I have spent my life acquiring pieces that would have otherwise been lost or destroyed, preserving them for a future I will not see. This is not a hoard, it is a sacred trust. And whoever inherits this burden must understand that there are people who would do anything to claim what lies below. People who believe that possession is more important than stewardship. They are wrong. They have always been wrong." Beneath it, separated by several blank pages, was a sequence of numbers. 7, 39, 2. "Is that the combination?" Petra's voice was tense with excitement. "Maybe. Or maybe it's something else entirely." Victor closed the journal carefully. "There's only one way to find out." They returned to the cellar as the afternoon light faded, carrying battery-powered lanterns to supplement the single beam of Petra's phone. Victor knelt beside the trapdoor, the journal open at his side. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the combination lock. 7, 39, 2. He tugged on the lock. Nothing. It remained firmly shut. "Try it backward," Petra suggested. 2, 39, 7. Victor reset the dials. This time, when he pulled, the lock sprang open with a sharp click. They stared at each other for a long moment, the silence in the cellar suddenly heavy with the weight of what they were about to uncover. Whatever Augustus had hidden down there, he had wanted it kept secret. He had wanted it protected. The warnings from the journal echoed in Victor's mind. "Should we open it?" Petra whispered. Victor thought of the bills piling up on the kitchen counter. He thought of the in-laws who had so mercilessly cast them aside. He thought of his grandfather, a man who had poured his entire life into something he clearly believed was of monumental importance. "Yes," he said, "we're opening it." The trapdoor was heavier than it looked. The hinges groaned in protest as Victor heaved. Petra helped him, her muscles straining until it fell back against the floor with a deep thud that echoed through the house. Below was darkness. Stone steps descended into nothing, disappearing beyond the reach of their lights. The air that rose from the opening was cool and dry, carrying a strange scent. Old paper, canvas, something chemical, but not unpleasant. Victor took a lantern and shined it down the steps. The beam revealed glimpses of a chamber below, larger than he'd expected. He could see wooden crates, shapes shrouded in cloth, the edge of what looked like filing cabinets. "What is all this?" Petra whispered. Victor didn't answer. He couldn't, because a dawning understanding was settling over him, an understanding of what his grandfather had done, what he had spent a lifetime protecting. And the weight of that realization was both terrifying and overwhelming. He stood at the edge of the opening, staring down into his grandfather's secret, and he knew with absolute certainty that their lives were about to change forever. The only question was whether that change would save him or destroy him. Victor descended the stone steps slowly, each footfall echoing in the chamber below. Petra followed close behind, the beam from her phone joining his lantern to push back the darkness. The air grew colder as they went down, and Victor counted 15 steps before his feet touched a solid floor. The chamber was larger than the cellar above, extending well beyond the footprint of the house. Someone, presumably Augustus, had excavated and reinforced this space with concrete walls and a surprisingly sophisticated ventilation system. The air was dry, almost sterile, a world away from the damp, musty cellar above. Victor raised his lantern higher, and the scope of what lay before them came into focus. Wooden crates lined the walls, stacked 2 and 3 high, each stenciled with codes that meant nothing to him. Between the crates stood several large objects shrouded in heavy canvas tarps. Filing cabinets occupied one corner, their metal surfaces showing no sign of rust, despite their subterranean home. Against the far wall, wooden frames were leaned in careful rows, their contents hidden by protective wrappings. "Dad," Petra whispered, as if speaking any louder might disturb something sacred. "What is all this?" Victor walked to the nearest crate and set down his lantern. The wood was solid, well made, with brass latches that unclasped smoothly despite their age. He lifted the lid carefully. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a small painting, perhaps a foot by a foot and a half, its colors still impossibly vibrant. It depicted a young woman in Renaissance-era clothing, her expression serene, her eyes following the viewer with that uncanny quality only masterpieces possessed. "Is this real?" Petra leaned closer, her breath held in check. "I think so." Victor's hands trembled as he lifted the painting, feeling its weight, seeing the fine craquelure in the varnish that spoke of centuries. "I think it's all real." The next 2 hours passed in a daze of discovery. They opened crate after crate, each one revealing new wonders. Sculptures in marble and bronze, ceramics with glazes that caught the light like water, manuscripts in languages Victor couldn't read, their pages covered in elaborate calligraphy and gold leaf. Every piece was carefully packed, meticulously preserved, shielded from the ravages of time and decay. The filing cabinets revealed an even more remarkable treasure: order. Augustus had documented everything with scholarly precision. Each piece had a folder containing records of provenance, authentication notes, photographs, and detailed accounts of where and how he had acquired it. Victor pulled a file at random and read from Augustus's handwritten notes. Retrieved from Ashford Estate Sale, 1967. Family unaware of the piece's true significance. Renaissance bronze circa 1520, attributed to the workshop of Cellini. Authenticated via comparative analysis with known works. Another file detailed a rescue from a demolition site in Philadelphia, 1974. Building scheduled for destruction. Contents to be discarded. Ming Dynasty vase, early 15th century. Provenance traced to the Whitmore collection, thought lost in the 1892 fire. Petra stood beside one of the shrouded objects, her hand hovering over the canvas. She pulled the cover away carefully, revealing a large oil painting in an ornate, gilded frame. The canvas depicted a classical scene: figures in flowing robes, a landscape of rolling hills and distant mountains, all of it executed with a technical mastery that left Victor breathless. "What do you think this is worth?" Petra asked, her voice low. "I don't know, thousands? Tens of thousands?" Victor stepped closer, studying the brushwork. "Maybe more. I'm no expert." "Then we need one." Petra was already thinking practically, her designer's mind shifting to logistics and planning. "Someone who can authenticate these things. Tell us what we're really dealing with." Victor felt a pang of reluctance he couldn't quite explain. Augustus had hidden all this for a reason. The journal's warnings echoed in his memory. People who would do anything to claim what lies below. People who believe that possession is more important than stewardship. "We have to be careful," he said. Grandpa Augustus went to extraordinary lengths to keep this a secret. "But why?" Petra gestured to the chamber around them. "If this is valuable, if it could have solved any financial problems he had, why hide it?" Victor had no answer. He returned to the filing cabinets, searching for something that might explain his grandfather's choices. Near the bottom of the middle drawer, he found a folder thicker than the others, labeled simply History. Inside was Augustus's account of his life's work, not of individual pieces, but of the larger story. Victor read it aloud, his voice soft in the quiet room. "I began this collection not out of greed, but out of necessity. So many important works were being lost, sold to private collectors who locked them away, destroyed by families who didn't understand their value, scattered to the winds by estate sales and bankruptcies. I saw it happen time and again in my work as a conservator. Beautiful, historically significant pieces would simply vanish." He turned the page. "So I began to save what I could. When I found a piece at risk, I acquired it. Sometimes through purchase, sometimes through negotiation with owners who had no idea what they possessed. I documented everything. I kept proper records. I ensured each piece was preserved correctly. This is not a collection for profit. It is a repository, a trust for future generations." Petra moved to his side, reading along. "But some of these pieces must be worth a fortune. Why didn't he donate them to museums? Victor found the answer further down the page. Legal entanglements, ownership disputes, claims and counterclaims that could have kept the pieces locked in court for decades. Augustus had been safeguarding them until ownership could be clearly established. And now that responsibility falls to you, Petra said softly. The weight of it settled on Victor like a physical thing. He thought of the bills upstairs, of the in-laws who had abandoned them, of the uncertain future they faced. Down here was potentially enough wealth to solve every problem they had. But Augustus had chosen secrecy over security, stewardship over profit. We need more information before we decide anything, Victor said finally. I have a friend who might be able to help. Alistair Pitton. We worked together years ago, before he left tech to teach art history. If anyone can tell us what we're really dealing with, it's him. Can you trust him? Victor thought about it. He'd known Alistair for 15 years. He'd been to his wedding. He knew his kids' names. Yes, I think so. But we'll tell him only what he needs to know. Show him a few pieces. Get his expert opinion. Nothing more. Petra nodded slowly. Okay. But Dad, we also need to think about us. Mom's medical bills aren't going away. I can't live on freelance income forever. Whatever Grandpa Augustus intended, he's gone. We're the ones living with the consequences. She was right, and Victor knew it. But he also knew that making rash decisions out of desperation was how people made catastrophic mistakes. Augustus had spent decades building and protecting this collection. The least Victor could do was understand what he had inherited before deciding its fate. They covered everything carefully, replaced the items in their boxes, and made sure the room looked untouched. As they climbed the stone steps back into the cellar, Victor felt the heft of the trap door as he closed it, the solid thud as it settled back into place. Above them, the house groaned and shifted. Outside, night was falling. Somewhere across town, the Harwoods were probably sitting down to dinner, satisfied that they had punished the man they blamed for their daughter's death. They had no idea what Victor had just found, or that beneath the dilapidated house they had helped force him into, a fortune was waiting in the dark. Victor wasn't sure yet what he would do with that knowledge, but he was absolutely certain of one thing. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't let greed or desperation dictate his choices. His grandfather had entrusted him with something precious. He would not betray that trust, no matter how much easier it might make his life. Alistair Pitton arrived 3 days later, driving a modest sedan that looked out of place in the overgrown driveway. He stepped out carrying a leather satchel and wearing the same slightly rumpled blazer Victor remembered from a decade ago, though the beard was new and shot through with gray. Victor. They shared a brief, awkward hug, the way men do when too much time has passed. I got your message. Sounded like you could use a friend. I could. Victor glanced back at the house. But I also need an expert opinion. Come on in. Petra had cleaned up the office as best she could, setting out folding chairs and a card table. She made coffee on their camp stove, and the three of them sat together as Victor explained what had happened over the last few months. Diane's death, the in-laws' rejection, the house. He saved the discovery in the cellar for last, watching Alistair's face carefully. Are you telling me your grandfather had a hidden art collection? Alistair set down his coffee cup, his academic curiosity thoroughly piqued. And you need me to authenticate it? Just look at a few pieces. Tell me what we're dealing with, Victor said, getting to his feet. Then we can decide what to do next. The descent into the chamber felt different with someone else present. Alistair's sharp intake of breath when he saw the sheer scale of what lay below confirmed everything Victor had suspected. It was extraordinary. Victor selected 3 pieces to show him. The Renaissance portrait from the first crate, a small bronze sculpture, and one of the larger paintings, still covered but ready to be unveiled. Alistair examined the portrait first, pulling a jeweler's loupe from his bag and studying the brushwork under a battery-powered work light they had set up. Minutes passed in silence, then more minutes. Victor and Petra waited, barely breathing. "The technique is correct," Alistair murmured, more to himself than to them. "The craquelure pattern is consistent with the age. The pigments—" He pulled out what looked like a small spectrometer and took a few readings. "This is either genuine or it's the finest forgery I have ever seen in my life. And if it is genuine, you're looking at something worth well into 6 figures, possibly more, depending on the attribution." Alistair reverently set the painting down. "Show me the others." The bronze sculpture received similar scrutiny. Alistair photographed it from multiple angles, measured its proportions, and examined casting marks Victor couldn't even see. When he finally looked up, his expression was grave. "This is from a Renaissance workshop. I'd need lab analysis to be certain, but the quality suggests the direct involvement of a master. Where did your grandfather get these things?" "The records say estate sales, demolition sites, places where valuable things were being overlooked or discarded." Victor handed him one of Augustus's provenance folders. He had documented everything. Alistair read through the papers, his fingers trembling slightly. "This is meticulous, professional-grade research. Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing." He looked up. "Victor, if half of what's in here is authentic, you are sitting on a collection worth millions, possibly tens of millions." The number felt abstract, impossible. Victor gestured to the large, cloth-draped painting. "One more. The largest one." They pulled the canvas away together, and Alistair froze. The painting was immense, perhaps 6 feet by 8, depicting a classical scene with dozens of figures arranged in architectural spaces that seemed to recede into an infinite depth. The colors blazed even under the harsh work lights, reds, blues, and golds that seemed to generate their own luminescence. Alistair stood so still for so long that Petra finally asked, "What is it?" "I need to check something." His voice was hoarse. He took out his phone and began navigating what looked like an academic database. His face grew pale. "Victor, do you know what the DeVoe collection was?" "No." In 1952, it was the largest private art collection in America. The DeVoe family estate burned down, and everything was reported as lost. The insurance companies paid out over $50 million, the equivalent of 10 times that in today's money. Alistair's hand was shaking as he pointed at the painting. "This matches the description of the centerpiece, a work attributed to the school of Varazzi, possibly by the master himself." Victor felt the room tilt slightly. "That's not possible. Look at this." Alistair showed him his phone's screen, displaying a grainy black-and-white photograph from an old catalog. Even in low quality, the composition was unmistakable. This painting was thought to have been destroyed. If this is authentic, if this is truly the DeVoe piece— He trailed off, seeming to gather himself. "Victor, this one painting could be worth $500 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Petra sat down on one of the crates, her face blank with shock. Victor found he couldn't process what he was hearing. "That's insane," he finally said. "A painting can't be worth that much." This one can. It's not just the artistic merit, though that alone would make it priceless. It's the provenance, the history, the fact that it was considered lost for over 70 years. Alistair was pacing now, radiating a nervous energy. Do you understand what you've found? This changes everything we thought we knew about the DeVoe fire. Victor's mind was racing. Augustus had hidden this, kept it secret for decades, gone to extraordinary lengths to protect it. Why? If this painting alone could have solved any financial problem imaginable, why bury it under a house and tell no one? The insurance companies, Petra said quietly. They all turned to look at her. If the painting wasn't destroyed, she continued, if it somehow survived, wouldn't they want it back? Or to be compensated? Alistair nodded slowly. That is one complication. There would also be questions from the DeVoe heirs about legal ownership, about how your grandfather acquired it. He looked at Victor, his expression serious. This isn't just valuable, Victor. It's complicated. Dangerous, even. Dangerous how? Art of this caliber attracts attention. Not all of it good. There are collectors who would do anything to acquire a piece like this. Legal challenges, lawsuits, possibly worse. Alistair ran a hand through his hair. You need lawyers. Real lawyers who specialize in art recovery and disputed provenance. You need security. And you need to be very, very careful about who knows this exists. Victor thought of the Harovs, of Randolph's cold eyes and Constance's cutting words. He thought of the debt collectors and the foreclosure notices, and the way people now looked at him with pity or contempt or both. What do I do? He asked softly. First, we document everything properly. Every piece, every file, every scrap of paper your grandfather left. Alistair's academic training was taking over, organizing the chaos into manageable steps. Then, we need to research the legal situation, find out what claims might exist, what your rights are as his heir. He put a hand on his friend's shoulder. And you, Victor, need to decide what you want. Because once this gets out, you won't be able to control what happens next. They spent another hour in the chamber, Alistair taking photographs and notes, Victor and Petra watching their lives transform with each new revelation. When they finally came back up to the cellar, sealing the door behind them, Victor felt an exhaustion that physical labor had never managed to produce. Alistair left with a promise to do some discreet research, to contact people in the art world who could be trusted. But as Victor watched his friend's car disappear down the driveway, he felt a growing sense of unease. Augustus had hidden this for a reason. He had chosen secrecy, even if it meant dying without ever benefiting from what he had preserved. That choice hinted at something Victor was only now beginning to grasp. Some secrets, once unearthed, could not be put back. And some treasures came with a cost that money could never measure. The stranger appeared on a Tuesday morning, parked across the street in a dark sedan that Victor noticed immediately, because no one ever parked on their road. The house was too isolated, too forgotten. But there it sat, engine off, windows tinted, making no attempt to hide its presence. Victor watched from the office window with a cold knot in his stomach. He had been expecting something like this since Alistair's visit 4 days earlier. Expecting it, but hoping he was wrong. Petra, he called out softly. Come here. She joined him at the window, following his gaze. How long has he been there? 20 minutes, maybe more. Victor let the curtain fall back into place. We need to be more careful. That afternoon, While Petra worked on a design project upstairs, Victor returned to the archives in the parlor. He'd been avoiding Augustus's personal papers, focusing on the collection's documentation, but now he needed to understand the whole story. He found it in a manila envelope taped to the back of the bottom file drawer. Inside was a letter, sealed in plastic, with Victor's name written on the front in his grandfather's careful script. Below the name, in smaller letters, were the words, "Open only if they come for it." Victor's hands trembled as he broke the seal. The letter was dated 1998, 17 years before Augustus's death. Victor read it twice and then a third time, each pass revealing new layers of his grandfather's burden. "My dearest Victor," it began, "if you are reading this, then you have found the collection, and you have attracted the wrong kind of attention. For that, I am sorry. I had hoped this would remain hidden until a time when it could be properly returned. But fate rarely cooperates with our plans." The letter explained everything. In 1952, Augustus had been hired to restore several paintings at the DeVoe estate. He'd arrived 3 days after the fire, horrified by the devastation. The main house was a ruin, the family was dead, and everything was presumed lost. But Augustus had found the collection's vault, fireproof and intact, hidden in the estate's sub-basement. Inside were treasures beyond imagining, everything the DeVoe family had spent generations acquiring. And standing beside Augustus in that vault was the family's lawyer, a man named Thaddeus Harrington. Victor's blood ran cold at the name. Augustus described what happened next with painful clarity. Harrington wanted to claim the collection was destroyed, split the insurance payout, and sell the pieces off gradually through private channels. A fortune stolen from the ashes, with no one the wiser. Augustus refused, threatening to report Harrington to the authorities. The lawyer had simply smiled, saying no one would ever believe a humble restorer over a man of his standing and connections. He gave Augustus a choice: participate in the theft or face the consequences. That night, Augustus made his decision. He went back to the vault alone and, piece by piece over the course of 3 weeks, he removed the entire collection. He documented everything, kept perfect records, and hid it all away. Not to steal it, never that, but to protect it from thieves. The DeVoe family had no living heirs. Their will stipulated that everything go to charity, specifically to the Metropolitan Museum, Augustus wrote. But Harrington suppressed the will, claimed it was invalid, and produced documents suggesting distant relatives existed who would inherit. All lies, all fabrications. I had the proof, but no way to bring it forward safely. The letter went on to detail Augustus's attempts to expose the fraud. He went to the FBI in 1974 and presented his evidence. The investigation was quietly closed within months, with no explanation. He tried journalists, lawyers, even wrote to museum directors. Nothing worked. The Harrington family was too powerful, too connected. "And so I waited," Augustus wrote. "I preserved everything. I kept it all in perfect condition, hoping that one day, when the Harringtons were gone or their power had waned, the truth could come out. I broke the law to serve justice, Victor. I accept that burden. But I will not let these treasures fall into the hands of thieves." The letter ended with a warning that made Victor's chest tighten with a cold dread. The Harrington family has never stopped looking for this collection. Thaddeus died in 1989, but his son Cornelius continues the search. They believe the collection is theirs by right, based on the forged documents they created. They are dangerous, Victor. Ruthless. If they find out you have what they're looking for, they will not stop until they get it. Be careful. Trust no one. And if you can find a way to return this collection to its rightful place, to the museums, to the public, to the world, then you will have accomplished what I could not. Victor sat in the dim light of the parlor, the letter in his hands, finally understanding why Augustus had chosen secrecy over wealth. This wasn't just valuable art. It was evidence of a crime, of massive fraud, of a theft disguised as a legal maneuver. And now it was Victor's problem. He went upstairs and found Petra making dinner on their camp stove, the domestic routine a stark contrast to the weight of what he had just learned. He showed her the letter and watched her face pale as she read. "This is serious," she said. "These people, if they're as powerful as your grandfather said—" "I know," Victor said, moving to the window and carefully peering from behind the curtain. The sedan was gone, but that somehow made it worse. "We need help. Real help, not just an art history professor." "What kind of help?" Before Victor could answer, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered it cautiously. "Mr. Crane." A woman's voice, professional but warm. "My name is Margot Ashton. I'm an investigator, and I'd very much like to speak with you about your grandfather's house. Would it be possible to meet?" "What kind of investigator?" "The kind that's been investigating the Harrington family for 20 years. The kind who knows exactly what you've found in your basement." There was a pause. "The kind who can help you, if you'll let me." Victor gripped the phone tighter. "How do you know about—" "Please, Mr. Crane, not over the phone. There's a cafe in town, the Morning Grounds. Tomorrow at 10? "Tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Her voice softened. "I'm not your enemy. My grandmother died in the DeVoe fire. I've dedicated my life to finding out what really happened. I think we can help each other." She hung up before Victor could reply. He stood there, the dead phone in his hand, feeling the walls of the old house closing in. The sedan watching from the road. Margot Ashton knowing about the collection. The Harrington family, somewhere out there, still searching after 70 years. "What do we do?" Petra asked, her voice barely a whisper. Victor thought of Augustus, spending decades protecting these treasures in solitude, dying without ever seeing justice. He thought of Diane, and how he had failed her by not acting fast enough. He thought of the bills upstairs and the responsibility downstairs, and the impossible choice between safety and truth. "We meet her," he said finally. "Tomorrow. But we're careful. We don't trust anyone completely until we know what we're really dealing with." Petra nodded, but her face held the same fear Victor felt coiled in his own stomach. They had stumbled into something far bigger than themselves, inherited a war they didn't understand. And somewhere in the darkness outside, people were watching, waiting for them to make a mistake. Morning Grounds occupied a corner storefront in the small downtown, the kind of place where retired farmers nursed coffee for hours and local gossip flowed like a river. Victor arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a booth in the back with a clear view of both entrances. Old habits from a life that now felt a lifetime away. Margot Ashton walked in at precisely 10 o'clock. She was younger than Victor had expected, maybe in her early 40s, dressed in practical jeans and a field coat, carrying a worn leather satchel that looked well-traveled. Her eyes found his immediately, and she approached with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. "Mr. Crane." She extended a hand. "Thank you for meeting me." "You didn't leave me much of a choice," Victor replied, his grip firm. You know things you shouldn't. I know a lot of things I shouldn't. It's my job. She sat across from him and ordered a black coffee from the passing waitress without a glance at the menu. I've been tracking the DeVoe collection for most of my adult life. When Augustus Crane died 15 years ago, I knew the trail had gone cold. Then you inherited the property, and suddenly there was activity. Your friend Alistair Payton isn't as discreet as he thinks he is. Victor's jaw tightened. You've been following us. Watching the house, that's different. Margot's coffee arrived and she wrapped her hands around the warm mug. I'm not the only one watching either. You noticed the sedan? Dark blue tinted windows? Yes, the Harringtons. Private investigators they keep on retainer. They've monitored Augustus's property for years, waiting for something to surface. Your arrival piqued their interest. Alistair's visit confirmed their suspicions. She took a sip of coffee. You're in danger, Mr. Crane. More than you know. Then why should I trust you? Because my grandmother was Alice Ashton, head housekeeper for the DeVoe family. She died in the fire that killed them all. Margot pulled a photograph from her bag and slid it across the table. A young woman in a formal uniform stood beside an elderly couple. She raised me after my mother died. She told me stories about the family, about the collection, about how beautiful it all was. Then, one night, it was all just ashes. Victor studied the photograph. The elderly couple must be the DeVoes, looking dignified and kind. The faded image. The official report called it an electrical fire, Margot continued. But my grandmother called her sister the day before she died. She said strange men had been at the house, asking about valuables. She said the family lawyer had been arguing with Mr. DeVoe about something important. She was scared. Margot's voice remained steady, but Victor could hear the ancient pain behind it. The next day, they were all dead, and Thaddeus Harrington was claiming the collection was destroyed. Augustus's letter said the same thing. It said Harrington meant to steal it all. Margot leaned forward. So you found the letter. Good. That means you understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just about art, Mr. Crane. This is about murder, fraud, and decades of corruption. The Harrington family built an empire on the crime they committed in 1952. If that collection surfaces with its provenance intact, if Augustus's documentation proves what really happened, the entire family could face criminal charges. It was 70 years ago, but there's no statute of limitations on murder and insurance fraud on this scale. The corporations would pursue recovery forever. She pulled more papers from her satchel. I've spent 20 years investigating. I have proof of the Harringtons' ties to organized crime in the 50s. Proof they used intimidation, and worse, to silence anyone who got close to the truth. But I never had the collection itself. I never had the proof that Augustus compiled. Victor felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Every instinct screamed caution, but there was something genuine in Margot's steady gaze. Her grief was real, her dedication undeniable. Show me your proof, he said. They spent the next hour poring over Margot's research. She had newspaper clippings, FBI documents obtained through Freedom of Information requests, depositions from people who had worked for the Harringtons over the decades. The picture that emerged was damning. A family that had used the DeVoe tragedy as the foundation for their wealth and power. The current patriarch is Cornelius Harrington, Margot explained. 71 years old. He controls a commercial real estate empire worth billions. His grandfather Thaddeus built their fortune by stealing and selling off pieces of the DeVoe collection gradually, over decades. Cornelius has spent his life searching for the rest. Why? He's already rich. Greed? Pride? Fear? Margot gathered her papers. If the collection turns up and the truth comes out, everything his family has built crumbles. They'd lose their reputation, probably their freedom. Cornelius needs to find those pieces and destroy them, along with any evidence of how they were obtained. Victor's phone vibrated. A text from Petra. Someone tried to get into the house. Cops are here. He shot to his feet. I have to go. I'm coming with you. They drove back in a tense silence. Victor's hands white-knuckled on the wheel. He had left Petra alone. If anything had happened to her because of his grandfather's secrets. A police cruiser was parked in the driveway when they arrived. Petra was on the porch talking to an officer, her face pale but composed. Victor was out of the car before it had fully stopped. I'm okay, Dad. She gave him a quick, tight hug. Someone tried to pry open the back door while I was working. I heard them and called 911. They took off when they heard me on the phone. The officer took Victor's statement and promised to increase patrols, though they all knew what little that meant on such an isolated road. After he left, the three of them stood in the study, the gravity of the situation pressing in on them. They're getting bolder, Margot said. When Cornelius decides he needs something, he doesn't stop. Victor made a decision. Come with me. He led them down to the cellar, to the secret door. Margot's sharp intake of breath when she saw the vault was all the confirmation he needed that she was telling the truth. This was what she had been searching for her entire adult life. They showed her everything. The collection, Augustus's documentation, the letter. Margot moved through the space like a pilgrim in a holy site, not touching a thing without permission, her eyes shining with unshed tears. It's real, she whispered. It's all real. Alice, she told me about these pieces. I remember her descriptions. She turned to Victor. Your grandfather saved them. He saved everything. What do we do with it now? We fight. Margot's voice was firm. We find a lawyer who can't be bought. We document everything properly. We build a case so ironclad that not even the Harrington family's power can suppress it. She looked at the masterpiece, still uncovered from Alistair's visit. And we make sure the world knows the truth about what happened in 1952. Victor thought of Petra upstairs, of the attempted break-in, of the sedan watching his home. He thought of Augustus, alone with his secrets for decades. He thought about justice and risk and the cost of doing the right thing. All right, he said. We'll do it. But we do it carefully, and we do it smart. I will not have my daughter get hurt over this. Agreed. Margot took out her phone. I know someone. A lawyer named Sylvia Pritchard. She specializes in art recovery and estate law. She's helped expose fraudulent claims before. If anyone can handle this legally, it's her. They ascended the stairs, back into the late afternoon light. Victor locked the secret door, the click of the mechanism sounding like a door closing on one life and opening onto another. The war Augustus had fought alone was now theirs to finish. And somewhere across town, the Harrington family was planning their next move. Sylvia Pritchard arrived 2 days later. A woman in her late 50s, with a shock of silver hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms. She examined Augustus's documentation with the focused intensity of a surgeon, saying nothing for the first hour except to occasionally request specific files or photographs. They set up a makeshift war room in the study, spreading documents across every available surface. Margot brought her research. Alistair returned, bringing authentication reports from colleagues he trusted. Petra created digital backups of everything, storing them in encrypted cloud accounts. "This is extraordinary," Sylvia said at last, setting down the provenance file she'd been reading. "Your grandfather built an irrefutable case. Every piece is documented, every acquisition explained, every authentication backed by evidence. This isn't a collection, it's a legal case waiting to be filed." "Can we win?" Victor asked. "Against the Harringtons in court?" "Absolutely. The original DeVoe will is clear. Everything was intended for public museums and charities. The Harrington claim is based entirely on forged documents. Documents your grandfather proved were fraudulent." Sylvia pulled up her laptop. "But winning in court isn't your only problem." She showed them a news story from that morning. "Harrington Real Estate files suit against local estate," the headline read. A cold dread settled in Victor's stomach as he read the details. Cornelius Harrington had filed a lawsuit claiming that Augustus Crane had stolen property from his family back in 1952. He had produced documents, fakes, Victor knew, but officially filed, showing Augustus had been hired by the Harringtons to transport certain items after the DeVoe fire. He was alleging that Augustus never delivered those items, essentially accusing Victor's grandfather of grand theft. "That's insane," Petra said. "They're rewriting history." "They're establishing a legal framework," Sylvia corrected. "If they can prove Augustus took anything that belonged to them, even under false pretenses, they can lay claim to everything in your possession. It's actually brilliant. Malignant, but brilliant." "What do we do?" "We file a countersuit immediately. We present the true DeVoe will, Augustus's documentation, everything. We force this into open court where their fabrications can be challenged." Sylvia looked at each of them, her expression serious. "But understand this. The moment we file, this becomes public. The media will descend on you. Every detail of your lives will be scrutinized, and the Harringtons will fight with everything they have." Victor thought of Petra, of the quiet life they were trying to rebuild. He thought of his in-laws, who already blamed him for Diane's death, and how they would react to headlines about stolen art and family scandals. "There is another option," Margot said quietly. "We could approach the Harringtons privately, offer them a deal, return a few pieces in exchange for them dropping their claims." "No." Victor's voice was firm. "Augustus spent his life protecting this collection from thieves. I will not start negotiating with them now. Not for safety. Especially not for safety." He looked at the photograph of Augustus on the desk, the one of his grandfather standing proudly in front of this house when it was new. "He did the hard thing. He lived alone with this burden. The least I can do is finish what he started." Sylvia nodded in approval. "Then we need to move fast. I'll file our countersuit tomorrow. We'll petition for an expedited hearing based on the urgency of their accusations. With luck, we could be in court within 6 weeks." The next few days were a blur of preparation. They cataloged every piece in the collection, photographing everything from multiple angles and compiling Augustus's documentation into a comprehensive summary. Alistair brought in more experts, each sworn to secrecy, each confirming the authenticity and value of the collection. The Harringtons increased the pressure. The sedan outside became a constant presence. Petra received threatening emails, warning her to convince her father to be reasonable. Local businesses started refusing Victor credit, clearly swayed by Harrington money and connections. But something unexpected happened too. Francine, his neighbor, began to rally the community's support. She had known Augustus and remembered him as a kind man who had helped her late husband with some legal work decades before. She told the townspeople the truth. that Augustus was a guardian of important treasures, not a thief. Small acts of support began to appear. Anonymous donations of food and supplies were left on the porch. A local contractor offered free labor for repairs on the house. Notes slipped under the door expressed encouragement and belief in their cause. Your grandfather was important to people here, Francine told Victor one evening. More than you ever knew. He helped so many over the years, never asking for anything in return. People remember that. The preliminary hearing was set for a Monday in late October. The weekend before, Victor barely slept. He memorized every detail of the case, rehearsing his testimony with Sylvia until his voice was raw, but the anxiety still gnawed at him. On Sunday night, he found himself alone in the living room, surrounded by the treasures Augustus had protected. The masterpiece painting seemed to glow in the lantern light, its beauty untouched by centuries. Victor understood now why his grandfather had given up comfort and security to preserve these things. They were more than objects. They were human achievement, creativity made tangible, a connection to history and meaning. I hope I'm doing right by you, he said to the empty air, to the memory of Augustus. I hope this is what you wanted. Petra found him there an hour later. She sat beside him on one of the crates, leaning her head on his shoulder as she had when she was little. Mom would be proud of you, she said softly, for standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. It's why she fell in love with you. Victor felt tears burn in his eyes. I miss her. I know, me too. Petra squeezed his hand. But we're still here, Dad. We're still fighting. That's what matters. That night, Victor slept dreamlessly for the first time in months. When morning came, he put on the only suit he had managed to retrieve from the foreclosure, the same one he had worn to Diane's funeral. Somehow, it felt fitting. Both occasions were about honoring the dead by living with integrity. They drove to the courthouse together. Victor, Petra, Sylvia, Margot, and the appraiser. A small army facing an empire. The news vans were already there, tipped off by someone about the hearing. Reporters shouted questions that Victor ignored. Inside the courtroom, the Harrington legal team was waiting. 6 lawyers in expensive suits, radiating confidence and money. Behind them sat Cornelius Harrington himself, an elderly man with sharp eyes and the posture of someone accustomed to getting his way. But what shocked Victor was seeing Randolph Harrove sitting beside Cornelius. His former father-in-law wore a self-satisfied smirk, as if he had been proven right about Victor all along. Petra gripped Victor's arm. What is he doing here? Before Victor could answer, Randolph approached them. Victor, I tried to warn you. I tried to make you see reason, but you could never accept reality, could you? Not even when it killed my daughter. Mr. Harrove, Sylvia stepped between them. You need to step away. I'm here as a witness, Randolph said. The Harringtons deserve to know what you're hiding. I told them everything I know about your grandfather's house. Everything I learned from Diane over the years. You can't win this, Victor. You're going to lose everything all over again. And this time you'll drag Petra down with you. Victor felt rage surge in his chest, but Petra's hand tightened on his arm, grounding him. Let's go, she said quietly. He's not worth it. They moved into the courtroom, leaving Randolph behind, but Victor's confidence was shaken. The betrayal stung more than he'd expected. His own father-in-law, working with the people trying to steal Augustus's legacy. The courtroom doors opened. Judge Miriam Holloway entered, settling herself with the gravity of someone who understood the weight of what they were about to hear. Victor sat at the defendant's table, his daughter by his side. and prepared to fight for his grandfather's truth. Everything was on the line now. Justice or corruption, truth or power. The next few hours would determine not only their future, but the legacy of all who believed these treasures were worth protecting. The judge's gavel fell, and the battle began. The Harringtons' lawyer rose first, a silver-haired man named Buchanan, who spoke with the practiced fluency of someone who had won so many cases he had no doubt in himself. He painted Augustus Crane as a thief, and Victor as a man desperate enough to exploit stolen goods. The entire situation was a tragedy, he argued, one that could be resolved if Victor would simply return what was not his. The Harrington family employed Mr. Crane's grandfather in good faith, Buchanan said, pacing before the judge. They entrusted him with valuable assets during a time of crisis. That trust was betrayed. Now, 70 years later, we seek only to reclaim what is rightfully ours. He presented the forged documents with confidence, each one officially authenticated, each one appearing legitimate to anyone who didn't know the truth. Victor watched Judge Holloway's face, trying to read her reaction. She revealed nothing. When Buchanan finished, Sylvia stood. She was shorter than the Harrington lawyer, less polished in her appearance, but when she spoke, the courtroom seemed to lean forward. Your Honor, this case is not about a simple contract dispute. It is about the systematic theft of one of America's greatest art collections and the murder of the family who owned it. The courtroom erupted. Buchanan objected loudly. Judge Holloway's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Counselor, the judge said sternly, that is a serious accusation. I trust you can substantiate it. I can, Your Honor. Sylvia approached the bench with a thick binder. I would like to present the complete documentation compiled by Augustus Crane over 40 years of investigation. This includes the original will of the DeVoe family, proof that the Harrington documents are forgeries, and evidence linking the Harrington family to the 1952 fire that killed the DeVoe family. For the next 2 hours, Sylvia methodically destroyed the Harrington case. She presented the original will, authenticated by handwriting experts. She showed how the Harrington documents contained anachronisms, references to laws that didn't exist in 1952, signatures from people who were verifiably elsewhere on the dates in question. The appraiser testified to the collection's authenticity, her credentials and careful analysis lending weight to every claim. Margot presented her grandmother's testimony, the phone call the day before the fire, the FBI documents showing an investigation that had been quietly suppressed. Victor watched Cornelius Harrington's face darken with every revelation. The old man leaned forward, whispering urgently to his lawyers, but there was nothing they could do. The truth was undeniable. Then Sylvia played the recording. Augustus's voice, preserved on a 1989 cassette tape, filled the courtroom. He spoke clearly and calmly, detailing exactly what had happened. Finding the collection, Thaddeus Harrington's attempted theft, the decision to protect the treasures until they could be properly returned. I broke the law, Augustus's voice said. I removed property that was not my own. But I did it to prevent a greater crime. I did it because someone had to stand between this treasure and the thieves. I accept the consequences of that choice, but I will not apologize for it. When the recording ended, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Victor felt tears on his face, hearing his grandfather's voice for the first time in decades, hearing the conviction and honor that had defined the man's life. Judge Holloway called for a recess. During the break, Victor saw Randolph Harrove arguing with Cornelius, both men's faces flushed with anger. Whatever deal they had struck was falling apart. When court resumed, Buchanan tried to salvage his case. He argued about statutes of limitations, claimed the recording was inadmissible, suggested Augustus had been unstable or confused, but even he seemed to know it was over. Judge Holloway asked Victor to take the stand. He had dreaded this moment, but as he sat and faced the judge, he felt surprisingly calm. "Mr. Crane," she said, "what would you do with this collection, were I to rule in your favor?" Victor looked at Petra, then at Margot, then back to the judge. "I would donate it, Your Honor, to museums, to institutions where people could see it and appreciate it. That was the DeVoe family's intent. It's what my grandfather was protecting it for. I don't want the money. I never did. I just want to finish what he started. Are you aware that the collection is worth hundreds of millions of dollars?" "Yes, ma'am. And I'm aware that some things are worth more than money. My grandfather taught me that. He gave his entire life to protecting something beautiful and important. The least I can do is honor that sacrifice." Judge Holloway studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Crane. You may step down." The judge took some time to review the documents one last time. Victor held Petra's hand, his heart hammering against his ribs. Everything they had worked for, everything Augustus had preserved, came down to this moment. Finally, Judge Holloway looked up. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented today," she said. "The original DeVoe will is authentic and legally binding. The Harrington family's claim is based on forged documents, created for the purpose of insurance fraud and theft. Augustus Crane acted to protect cultural treasures from criminals. While his methods were technically illegal, they served justice in a way the system failed to do." She looked directly at Cornelius Harrington. "Your family's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am recommending this case be referred to the state's Attorney General for investigation into possible charges of fraud and conspiracy." Buchanan started to rise in protest, but the judge silenced him with a look. "As for the collection," she continued, turning to Victor, "it is legally part of the estate of Augustus Crane, inherited by his grandson. Mr. Crane is appointed its legal guardian with full authority to determine the collection's future. It is my recommendation that it be donated to appropriate public institutions, as the DeVoe family originally intended." The gavel fell. Victor sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Then Petra was hugging him, Sylvia was shaking his hand, and Margot was crying openly with relief and vindication. Across the aisle, Cornelius Harrington rose slowly, an expression of cold fury on his face. He stared at Victor, with a hatred so pure it was almost physical. Then he turned and walked out, his lawyers scurrying to follow. Randolph Harrove remained in his seat, looking somehow smaller, diminished by his association with corruption and defeat. Victor didn't spare him a second glance. Some betrayals were beyond forgiveness. They had won. Against power, money, and decades of lies, they had won. Augustus's legacy was safe. The truth had prevailed. And for the first time since Diane died, Victor felt something like hope. The weeks following the court victory blurred into a cascade of decisions and revelations. News of the case spread quickly, attracting the attention of art institutions, historians, and media outlets from around the world. Victor's quiet life became anything but. The phone calls started immediately. Museum curators expressing interest in the collection, lawyers offering representation, journalists requesting interviews. Victor ignored most of them, relying on Sylvia to filter the legitimate inquiry. He's from those just seeking scandal or profit. 3 days after the hearing, representatives from the Metropolitan Museum arrived at the house. They brought conservators, appraisers, and security personnel. The procession of black SUVs in the driveway would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. Dr. Henrik Vollmer, the museum's chief curator, was a precise man in his 60s who treated each piece of Augustus's collection with reverent care. He spent 2 full days in the underground chamber, documenting everything, his hands trembling slightly as he examined the masterpiece. "Your grandfather saved more than art," he told Victor. "He saved history, cultural memory, things that can never be replaced once they are lost." He looked up from the canvas he was studying. "It would be our honor to give these pieces a permanent home." But Victor had learned to be cautious. "I need to understand the terms. My grandfather protected this collection from exploitation. I won't have it locked away in a vault or sold off piece by piece." "We would never," Dr. Vollmer began, then stopped, seeming to recognize that promises meant little without documentation. "Let me show you what we are proposing." The plan was comprehensive and respectful. The masterpiece would be the anchor of a new wing dedicated to recovered art and the stories of those who protected it. Other pieces would be distributed to appropriate institutions. Renaissance works to museums specializing in that era, sculptures to galleries that could display them properly. Everything would remain accessible to the public, properly attributed to the DeVoe family, with Augustus recognized as the guardian who saved it all. Most importantly, the original charitable intent of the DeVoe family would finally be honored. The proceeds from any reproductions or traveling exhibits would fund art education programs for underserved communities. "It's what Catherine DeVoe wanted," Dr. Vollmer had said. "To share beauty with everyone, especially those who might otherwise never have access to it. Your grandfather understood that. We want to continue his work." Victor read the contracts carefully. Sylvia reviewed every clause. When he finally signed his name, 3 weeks after the court hearing, he felt a wave of both relief and profound sadness. The collection that had been his grandfather's burden for 40 years, his own discovery only a few months ago, was passing into other hands. But they were the right hands. That was what mattered. The Harrington family's defeat grew absolute when investigators followed Judge Holloway's recommendation. The state attorney general launched an inquiry into the forged documents and the original insurance fraud. Though proving criminal charges after 70 years was difficult, the investigation shattered the family's reputation. Cornelius Harrington resigned from his company's board of directors. Several business partners severed ties. The empire built on stolen art began to crumble. Randolph Harrow faced his own judgment. Word of his collaboration with the Harringtons, of his betrayal of his own son-in-law for money, spread through his old community. Former friends distanced themselves. His country club quietly suggested he resign his membership. Constance filed for divorce, claiming she knew nothing of Randolph's dealings. Victor didn't know if that was true. He didn't particularly care. They had both turned their backs when he and Petra needed family most. The consequences of that choice were theirs to bear alone. One evening, 6 weeks after the hearing, Petra came downstairs to find Victor in Augustus's study. The room was now ringed with the journals and papers he had been slowly sifting through. "Find anything?" she asked, setting 2 mugs of tea on the desk. "A letter. Written to my grandmother, just before she died." Victor's voice was soft. "Augustus talks about the weight of his choices, about living with the secrets. He says he knows it cost him, cost them both, but that he couldn't abandon the collection to thieves. He asks for her forgiveness, for choosing principle over comfort. What did she say? There's a note pinned to it. Just one line. I married a man of honor. I would not trade that for any amount of ease. Victor set the papers down gently. They chose this together. They chose a harder life because it was the right thing to do. Petra was silent for a moment. Do you regret it? Fighting instead of taking the Harringtons' deal? Not for a second. Victor met her eyes. We did the right thing. That's more important than any amount of money. My mother used to say that about you, that you always chose the harder right over the easier wrong. Petra smiled sadly. The grandparents never understood that about you, or about her. They sat together in a comfortable silence, sipping tea as the darkness gathered outside. The house, once derelict and decaying, was now warm, filled with light and life. They had repaired the worst of the damage, restoring the beautiful structure Augustus had built so long ago. Brenton had become a regular visitor, occasionally bringing dinner and sharing stories about Augustus that helped Victor understand the grandfather he'd only known in pieces as a child. The man who helped neighbors with legal troubles, who volunteered at the library, who lived a quiet but determined life. His secret burden carried with dignity. The museum wants us at the opening, Petra said. In 3 months. They're creating an entire exhibit around Grandfather Augustus's story. Victor nodded slowly. The idea of being in the spotlight made him uneasy, but he understood its importance. Augustus had worked in the shadows out of necessity. His story deserved to be told in the light. We'll go, he said. We'll tell them about the man he was, the choices he made, the legacy he left. And after that? Petra asked. What do we do then? Victor looked around the study, at the restored house, at the daughter who had stood by him through it all. We live, he said simply. We build something good here. We honor Mom and Grandfather Augustus by living with the same integrity they showed us. That sounds perfect, Petra said softly. Outside, spring was arriving, slowly but surely. The garden was beginning to stir, new life pushing up through long dormant soil. Inside, a father and daughter sat together, grateful to have survived, proud of the choices they had made, and ready for whatever came next. The exhibition opening took place on a warm evening in early September. Victor stood before the grand entrance of the Metropolitan Museum, feeling deeply out of place in the suit Petra had insisted he buy for the occasion. The building loomed above them, its neoclassical columns and wide steps conveying permanence and cultural weight. Ready? Petra asked, adjusting his tie one last time. No, Victor admitted, but let's go anyway. Inside, the museum had transformed the collection into something magnificent. The exhibition took up an entire wing. Each piece was given space to breathe, to tell its story. But more than the art itself, Augustus's journey took center stage. His journals were displayed behind glass. Photographs of the house before and after the restoration showed the dedication it had taken to preserve the collection. A timeline detailed the 1952 fire, the investigation, and the decades of patient guardianship. The masterpiece hung in the central gallery, professionally restored and lit to showcase every detail. Crowds gathered before it, reading the extensive placard that told the full story of Catherine Devoe's vision, Thaddeus Harrington's attempted theft, and Augustus Crane's 40 years of cultural stewardship. A museum docent approached them. Dr. Vollmer would like you to meet someone. They were led through the galleries to a room where an elderly woman sat in a wheelchair, studying a small Renaissance portrait, with tears tracking down her face. She was perhaps 90, with elegant white hair and eyes that still held a remarkable clarity. Mr. Crane, Dr. Vollmer said quietly. This is Dorothy Ashcroft. She was Catherine Devoe's personal secretary before the fire. Victor knelt beside the wheelchair, suddenly aware he was in the presence of someone who had truly known the people behind the story. It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Ashcroft. The honor is mine, she replied, her voice frail but firm. I have waited 70 years to see these pieces again. I helped Catherine catalog this collection. I typed the descriptions for her estate inventory. I thought they were gone forever. She reached out, her hand gripping Victor's with surprising strength. Your grandfather gave me back something I thought I had lost. Not just the art, but the proof that beauty and goodness can survive, even when evil tries to destroy them. Did you know my grandfather, Augustus Crane? I met him once, years after the fire. I was looking for answers about what really happened that night. Someone suggested I speak with him. He had been on the property shortly after. Dorothy's eyes grew distant with the memory. He didn't tell me much. He said it wasn't safe, that some secrets had to stay buried. But he looked me in the eye and said, "The collection is alive. It is protected." That is all I can say. I thought he was being cryptic or perhaps a little confused. I never imagined. Her voice broke. Petra knelt beside Victor, offering Dorothy a handkerchief. Your grandmother worked for the family too, didn't she? Dorothy asked. Margot Ashton's grandmother. Alice was my sister-in-law. We were both there that night. We both barely escaped the fire. Dorothy's hands trembled slightly. The official story never made sense. Catherine was so careful about the electrical systems, almost paranoid after a small fire years before. And those men asking questions the week before. The arguments we overheard between Catherine and her lawyer. It all pointed to something darker. Thaddeus Harrington, Victor said softly. Yes, but we couldn't prove a thing. 2 household staff against a powerful lawyer? We would have been dismissed, or worse. Dorothy looked at the painting again. Alice spent her life trying to uncover the truth. She died without ever knowing. I am just so grateful I lived long enough to see this, to know Catherine's legacy is safe. They spent an hour with Dorothy, listening to her stories of Catherine Devoe, a woman who believed art belonged to everyone, who opened her home for educational tours, who was planning to donate the collection to museums before she died. The woman Harrington had murdered for profit. When Dorothy was wheeled away by her grandson, Victor felt the full weight of what Augustus had accomplished. He hadn't just saved objects. He had preserved a memory, honored the dead, and ensured that evil did not entirely win. The formal program began at 7. There were speeches from museum directors, art historians, and even the state attorney general, whose investigation had exposed the Harrington family's decades of fraud. Margot spoke about her grandmother and the long search for justice. Dr. Vollmer discussed the collection's artistic significance. Then, they called Victor to the podium. He had prepared notes, but he couldn't bring himself to read them. Instead, he spoke from the heart, looking out at the hundreds of faces, academics, collectors, journalists, ordinary people who loved art. My grandfather, Augustus Crane, wasn't a hero when this all began, Victor started. He was a tradesman who restored paintings for a living. But when he saw something wrong, something evil, he made a choice. It wasn't the easy choice or the profitable choice. It was the right one. He described finding the house, the trapdoor, the underground chamber. He described reading Augustus's journals and coming to understand the sacrifice his grandfather had made. He described the decision to fight, rather than to compromise with thieves. Augustus lived with his secrets for 40 years, and he died without ever seeing justice done. He gave up comfort, security, even relationships, to protect something he believed was more important than his own happiness. Victor's voice caught. I didn't understand that kind of sacrifice until recently. Until I lost my wife and had to decide what kind of man I was going to be in her absence. He saw Petra in the front row, tears on her face but smiling with pride. My grandfather taught me something over these last few months, even though he's been gone for years. He taught me that integrity isn't about grand gestures or public recognition. It's about the choices we make when no one is watching. The burdens we carry because someone has to. The harder right over the easier wrong. Victor looked toward the masterpiece shimmering under the museum lights. Catherine Devo wanted this collection to be shared with the world. Augustus Crane made sure it would be. And now, finally, her vision is a reality. Not because of wealth or power, but because one man chose honor over profit. He chose to protect instead of to exploit. He stepped away from the podium to sustained applause, feeling both exhausted and unburdened. Petra hugged him tightly, whispering, "That was perfect." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of handshakes and congratulations. Reporters asked for interviews. Museums inquired about his plans. Someone from PBS wanted to do a documentary. Victor deflected most of it, letting Sylvia handle the details. As the crowd thinned, he found himself alone in the central gallery, standing before the masterpiece one last time. He took out the photograph he had carried from the beginning. Augustus, in front of the house, young, proud, and filled with resolve. "We did it," Victor whispered to the image. "Your legacy is safe. Your choices mattered. And I finally understand." Petra appeared at his side, slipping her arm through his. "Ready to go home?" Home. The word warmed his chest. The house that had been a last resort had become a sanctuary. The town that had felt like an exile had become a community. The burden that had seemed impossible had become a purpose. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go home." They walked out together into the New York night, a father and daughter, survivors of a loss who had found meaning in honoring the past. The next day they would fly back to their restored house and their quiet lives. But tonight, standing on the steps of the museum with the city lights spreading before them, Victor allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. 8 months after the exhibition opening, Victor sat at his grandfather's desk, now his desk, compiling the final pages of a project that had consumed his evenings for weeks. The leather-bound volume before him represented months of careful work. A comprehensive catalogue of every piece from Augustus's collection, complete with provenance, Augustus's original notes, and the full historical context of each item's journey. Sunlight streamed through the study windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the warm air. The house had transformed completely from the decaying structure he and Petra had first found. New windows gleamed, and fresh paint covered walls that had once been water-damaged and peeling. The floors had been restored to their original luster. But more than the physical restoration, the house felt alive again, filled with purpose, memory, and love. Petra appeared in the doorway, a laptop tucked under her arm. Dad, she called. The publisher. They want to move up the release date. Apparently, pre-orders are already strong. The catalog was being published by a university press, making it a permanent record of Augustus's work and a reference text for art historians. Victor had insisted that all proceeds go to the Art Education Fund, established in Catherine DeVoe's name. It felt right, turning Augustus's careful documentation into something that would help others appreciate beauty. Whatever they think is best, Victor said, setting down his pen. How's business? Petra's design firm had launched 3 months earlier. Working from home, she had built a client list that kept her busy, but not overwhelmed. The stability gave her the freedom to be selective, to work on projects that interested her, rather than taking anything that paid the bills. Good, actually. Very good. She sat in the chair opposite his desk, the same chair where they had planned their legal strategy, where they had made the decisions that changed everything. I've been asked to speak at a design conference next month about building a business based on values, not just profit. Victor smiled. Your mother would be so proud of you. I'm proud of you. I learned from the best, Petra said, her voice soft. From both of you. Mom, who taught me to stand by the people I love. You, who taught me that doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Victor stood, surprised. They weren't expecting company. When he opened the door, he found Francine on the porch, holding a covered dish and wearing a hesitant smile. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said. I made too much stew, and I know how you two forget to eat when you're working. It was a transparent excuse. Francine was always bringing food, always checking in, but Victor had learned to accept the kindness with grace. Come in, we were just about to take a break. Over lunch in the kitchen they had completely restored. Francine shared the town gossip. The Historical Society wanted Victor to lead a workshop on preserving documents. The library had received a grant to start an art lending program, inspired by the news coverage of Augustus's collection. Small ripples, spreading out from the choices made in this house. Your grandfather would be impressed, Francine said. He spent his life working in secret, and now his story is inspiring people everywhere. I think he'd be uncomfortable with the attention, Victor said, but he was pleased that it was making a difference. After Francine left, Victor returned to the study and the final pages of the catalog. He had saved one task for the very end, writing the introduction that would set the tone for everything else. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, searching for words worthy of the task. Finally, he began to type. This catalog documents more than a collection of valuable objects. It records one man's lifelong commitment to protecting beauty and truth when both were under threat. Augustus Crane spent 40 years carrying a burden he could have abandoned at any moment. He chose the harder path, the lonelier path, because he believed that some things are more important than personal comfort. In compiling this catalog, I have come to understand my grandfather in ways I never could while he was alive. His meticulous records reveal not just a keeper of art, but a man of profound principle. Every entry shows his care, his respect for the artists and the objects they created. Every note demonstrates his awareness that he was a temporary guardian, protecting treasures for future generations. The collection is now where it belongs, accessible to all, fulfilling Catherine DeVoe's original vision. But this catalog serves another purpose. It is a reminder that ordinary people can make extraordinary choices, that integrity matters, and that one person, acting with courage and conscience, can preserve something precious against all odds. Augustus Crane never sought recognition. He did what he believed was right, and lived with the consequences. In the end, that may be the most valuable legacy of all. Not the art he saved, but the example he set. Victor read it through once, then closed the file. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It would have to be enough. Dusk fell softly over the property. Victor walked outside, something he did most evenings now, tracing the grounds that Augustus had let fall to neglect while he guarded secrets underground. The garden was blooming again. Petra had taken up landscaping as a hobby, planting flowers and vegetables in soil that had been fallow for decades. He found himself standing on the spot where he had first stood with Petra, looking at the ruined house and wondering if they could possibly survive. 9 months ago, a lifetime ago, everything had changed. His phone buzzed with a text from Alistair. Just got word. The Smithsonian's traveling exhibit has sold out in 3 cities. Augustus's story is resonating. Victor slipped the phone into his pocket, looking back at the house where lights now glowed warmly in the windows. His house, his home, built by his grandfather, neglected by time, restored by necessity, and now alive again with purpose and meaning. Inside he found Petra making dinner, humming along to the music playing from her phone. The scene was so beautifully ordinary it made his chest ache. This is what Augustus had protected, in his own way. The possibility of this moment. Family, home, peace earned through principle. Dad? Petra looked up from the stove. Are you okay? I am. Victor moved to help her, falling into the comfortable rhythm of shared tasks. I was just thinking about how far we've come. From foreclosure notices to museum exhibits, it's been a long journey. I was thinking more about the things that matter. You, this house, the choices we made. Victor paused, searching for the right words. When I lost your mother, when the Roves turned on us, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But you didn't. No, I lost some things, but I hadn't lost myself. I hadn't lost you. I hadn't lost the ability to choose who I wanted to be. He met her eyes. Augustus gave me that gift. Not the collection, not the money. The reminder that broken things can be mended. That even when everything falls apart, you can still choose integrity. They ate dinner together, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. Afterward, Victor returned to the study one last time, stopping before the photograph of Augustus that he had framed and hung on the wall. Thank you, he said simply, for trusting me, for teaching me, for showing me that some things are worth more than money, that some things must be protected at all cost. The photograph offered no reply, but Victor didn't need one. He understood now what Augustus had been trying to tell him for decades. Legacy wasn't about wealth or recognition. It was about the choices you made when everything was on the line. The person you decided to be, when being that person cost you everything. Victor switched off the study light and went upstairs to bed. The next day would bring new challenges, new opportunities, the ordinary routine of life. But tonight, he slept soundly in the house his grandfather had built, in the life he had rebuilt from the ruins, surrounded by love and purpose, and with the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done the right thing. She stopped as a powerful wave of pressure seized her abdomen, stealing her breath. Marcus glanced at his watch. That's 1. Let's time them. He worked methodically, transforming a corner of the cabin into a birthing area. Clean sheets on the bed, medical instruments sterilizing in boiling water. makeshift stirrups fashioned from clean rope and pillows. Every movement was efficient, with no wasted energy, no hint of panic. Sarah watched him through waves of growing discomfort. "You've really done this before?" "Twice in Afghanistan, once in South Sudan." He positioned lanterns for the best light. "Not ideal conditions, but we'll manage." Another contraction hit, harder than the first. Sarah breathed through it, using the techniques from her birthing classes. Marcus noted the time. 12 minutes since the last one. Still early. First babies usually take their time. He arranged pillows to support her back. "Try to rest between them. Conserve your strength." "And the men outside?" Marcus's expression hardened for a moment. "That is now a secondary concern. This cabin is 40 years old. It's solid construction. The entrance is defensible." The clinical assessment was oddly reassuring. Sarah nodded, then winced as another contraction began to build. 8 minutes, Marcus noted, surprised. "Moving faster than I expected." He went to the stove and returned with a cup of herbal tea. "Red raspberry leaf. Helps with labor." Sarah took it gratefully. "You just had that lying around?" "It's good for a number of medicinal purposes." A faint smile touched his lips. "Though I'll admit, obstetric supplies weren't my top priority when I scouted this place." The next few hours passed in a blur of escalating intensity. Marcus transformed before Sarah's eyes, the gruff recluse replaced by a focused, competent medic. He checked her progress regularly, his clinical detachment making the intimate exams less awkward than they might have been. 6 centimeters, he reported. Good progress. By evening, the contractions were coming every 3 minutes. Sarah gripped the edge of the bed, sweat matting her hair. "I don't know if I can do this." "You are doing it." Marcus's voice was firm, an anchor in the storm of pain. "Your body knows what to do. Trust it." A noise outside drew his attention to the window. Dusk had fallen, and with it came the sound of movement in the undergrowth, too deliberate for wildlife. "They're back," Sarah whispered between contractions. Marcus moved swiftly to the window, peering out cautiously. One person, on watch. He retrieved the rifle, positioning it nearby but out of sight of the windows. Then he returned to Sarah, coaching her through another contraction as if there had been no interruption. "Breathe deep. That's it." The contractions intensified further, now only a minute apart. Sarah cried out, unable to hold back the sound. "I need to push." Marcus examined her again. "Not yet. Almost, but not yet. Breathe through the urge if you have to." The noise outside stopped abruptly. Marcus went tense, listening. "They heard you." "I can't be quiet," Sarah gasped as another peak hit. "Don't try." He moved to position himself between the bed and the door, within reach of both Sarah and the weapon. "Let them listen. It might even work in our favor." "How?" she managed between breaths. "Few things are more terrifying than a woman in labor," Marcus said, the faint smile returning. "Even hardened men tend to keep their distance." As if in answer, the footsteps outside retreated back toward the tree line. Marcus nodded in satisfaction. "See? Tactical advantage." Sarah would have laughed if another contraction hadn't overwhelmed her. This one was different, an irresistible urge to bear down. "Marcus," she panted, "it's time." He checked one more time, then nodded, all trace of humor gone. "You're right. 10 centimeters. On the next one you push." Outside, the darkness was complete. The watcher had retreated, but Marcus knew they hadn't gone far. Inside, a new life was about to begin. Two forces, creation and threat, converging on this small cabin in the middle of nowhere. Ready? Marcus asked, positioning himself to guide the baby's arrival. Sarah nodded, gathering her strength as the next contraction began to swell. Push, he instructed calmly. Bring your child into the world. The sound of shattering glass broke the concentrated intensity of the delivery room. Marcus whipped his head toward the back window, where a gloved hand was now reaching through a jagged hole, fumbling for the lock. Sarah, keep pushing, he commanded, his calm voice belying the urgency of his movements as he lunged toward the intruder. With remarkable upper body strength, Marcus launched himself from his chair, using the momentum to seize the extended arm and twist it sharply. A cry of pain came from outside as Marcus slammed the arm against the window frame, forcing the fingers to release a hunting knife that clattered to the floor. Sarah screamed with another contraction, her focus torn between the demands of her body and the struggle at the window. I'm here, Marcus called to hers, maintaining his grip on the intruder while reaching for the rifle with his free hand. Keep going. You're doing great. The intruder yanked his arm free, disappearing from the broken window. Marco swiftly jammed a metal toolbox into the opening, then returned to Sarah's side, the shotgun resting across his lap. That was impressive, Sarah gasped, panting between contractions. Combat training, upper body strength pays off. He positioned himself to continue assisting with the birth, while keeping a clear line of sight to all entry points. Focus on pushing now. Muffled voices drifted from outside. Several of them. The intruder hadn't come alone. How many? Sarah asked, gritting her teeth as another contraction crested. 3, maybe 4. Marcus's voice remained steady. Don't worry about them. Hard not to, she managed, pushing through the pain. They're not getting in. His certainty was a comfort. Not while I'm here. The baby's head began to crown. I can see her, Marcus announced, his professional detachment momentarily broken by a wave of awe. One more big push,